by introducing the senior staff, our team, our CAPS team. To my far left is Dr. David Dedino. David's been with CAPS for more than 6 years now, and he's a great team member to our staff. Next to him is Dr. Amanda McKinney, who has been with us for 3.5 years, and she's going to be talking with you later about depression, and also might talk a little bit about the testing services, which I'll address as well. And then right next to me is Dr. Jenny Glass, and Jenny is on her 2nd year as part of the CAPS team. Now, this is our senior staff. We also every year welcome graduate interns as part of our team. So, first of all, CAPS, Counseling and Psychological Services. The purpose of CAPS is to provide confidential and professional counseling services to Longwood students so that the student can achieve their personal and academic goals. I'm going to talk about our 4 primary areas of focus within CAPS. The first being the clinical services that we provide. The second focus will be outreach, and the third will be training program, and then I'll finalize with the testing program. But really the bulk of the work that we do in CAPS with your students the bulk is the clinical services. And under clinical services, we spend the majority of our time providing individual counseling services. And students come to CAPS with a whole host of concerns, a lot of reasons that might have them come into CAPS, whether it be depression or stress or anxiety. It might be relationship difficulties, substance issues, eating concerns, really any concern that you think somebody might want to speak to a counselor or psychologist to serve that need in CAPS. So again, the majority of our time is spent one-on-one with students, with individual counselors. And we serve about 10% of the student population within individual counseling. So we would like you to know, as parents, know about our service, so that if your student calls or you hear concerns, we want you to certainly know about our services so that you can recommend your student to come to CAPS if you feel like that would be helpful. And sometimes students call you and they are concerned about one of their friends here, or maybe a roommate or a teammate, somebody in their class, and you can find your student also about CAPS, and they can share that information with their friends. In addition to the individual work that we provide group counseling, and this is a service that we really take a lot of pride in, our group counseling, because we know as clinicians that group counseling is sometimes more powerful than even individual work. Individual work, your student is working with one person, one psychologist or counselor. With group counseling, your student is in a room with a counselor or maybe 2 counselors in addition to peers. And we all know that we kind of tune in differently when somebody our own age or own cohort talks with us. And we find that with group counseling, the students really do a wonderful job of supporting each other and sharing with each other and encouraging each other. And we just see week in, week out that group counseling is a very powerful treatment for a lot of concerns. So we have groups available on a weekly basis that are highlighted on our website as well. We like students and parents to know about our groups because sometimes when we refer a student to one of our groups, the student might think, oh, I don't know if I can do groups. And we really want the student and parents to know that group counseling is really not a secondary treatment. It is the treatment of choice for many issues, especially stress and anxiety, sadness, depression, loneliness. Group counseling is kind of made for those concerns. In addition to individual counseling and group counseling, we also provide crisis intervention. So these are services for students who need emergent intervention and assessment to see if they are really safe to be at Longwood. So one of us is pretty much on call at all times. We're contacted either during office hours or after office hours, even on weekends, either through Longwood Police or through our residential care life professionals. They will reach out to us by phone, and we'll either consult with that professional on the phone about the student's concern, or we will travel into campus that student's concern. So we provide individual counseling, group counseling, and crisis intervention. And then the last part of the clinical service are psychiatric services. Longwood contracts with psychiatrists who come to CAPS on a monthly basis. Dr. Michael Judd now serves as our psychiatrist. He comes to Longwood from Lynchburg and meets with students individually to address whether medication might be a good avenue for that student to consider in either conjunction with their individual or group counseling, or sometimes medication alone. So he's happy to meet with students as well. Now, of all the clinical services that I talked about, psychiatric services are the only service that have a fee. Dr. Judd and Central Hospital collect fees, much like they would if that student went to his private office. The other services are free to students, and there's no exchange of money. It's very simple. There's no co-payment, there's no billing to insurance. So that really helps to ensure keep it free and manageable for students, but also confidentiality. Students, we don't bill, so parents don't receive a bill. So our services are confidential to students, and that means that we don't share information about students that come to us, whether that be on the phone or on campus. We just keep the information private between that student and us. There are exceptions to confidentiality. The main one being if a student becomes critically imminent in terms of hurting or killing themselves or somebody else. We are then obligated ethically and legally to breach confidentiality. Other times that we might breach confidentiality include when a student wants us to. Sometimes students want us to talk to a previous therapist, or they want us to consult with a psychiatrist, or maybe they want us to reach out to your coach or the faculty member or their parent. And we're happy to do that. Students sign a release of information giving us permission to talk with who they want us to talk with. Other exceptions to confidentiality exist. We're not paid to those very often, but they do include if we suspect abuse of a child or dependent person, they're mandated to report that suspicion. And if we're court ordered, we do at times are required to work with the court system. Again, with the population that we work with here at Longwood, those don't happen that often. So in addition to the clinical services that we provide, the digital counseling and the group counseling, crisis prevention, and also the psychiatric services, that serves, about 10% of the population. But we find that it's important to reach out to other students who might not ever step foot in our building. We want them to know about us, and we want to be educators to all students. So we spend some time also doing outreach services on the campus, and so we're happy to come into classrooms. We go into athletic groups. We are happy to meet with student organizations, whether that be a fraternity or the peer health educators. So any student group or faculty member can reach out to us and say, hey, we'd like for professionals to come in and talk about stress or mindfulness or wellness, and we're happy to do those outreach efforts on campus as well. We really operate on the model that we want to be known before we're needed. We want faculty and staff, students and parents to know us before there's a critical need for us. So we're happy to get out and about on campus. The third area that I wanted to touch on just very briefly is our training program. We do have internships, both undergraduate internships and graduate internships for students. Our undergraduate internship is available to all of the students, and they're generally psychology majors, or maybe sociology majors, sometimes social work majors, and we'd like to offer training opportunities for those students so that they can build their resume, build their experience, and start to network and learn more about what counseling field is like. And then we also have a graduate internship, and we gain graduate interns from Longwood University, from Lynchburg College, from Liberty University, thank you. So your student, when they come to CAPS, might very well be treated by a graduate intern who is supervised by one of the senior staff. So our graduate interns are part of the team. We're really proud of the work that they do as well. And then lastly, we do have a testing program where CAPS provides psychological testing for ADHD and learning disabilities. This is, again, one of the few fee-based services that we provide. So there is a cost, and we feel like it's a nominal cost, especially to compare those costs to what other agencies might require. The cost is $250 for the LD assessment only and $500 for the full assessment. And that, again, compared to other providers, is a very reasonable fee, and we're glad to provide this service to students. And something that you might listen for with your student or their friends, if a student is saying that they're putting so much time into their studies, and yet the results aren't what they expect, that might be a time to think about, could be a learning disability that's really interfering that's really getting in the way of their academic success. It goes back to our mission statement of providing services students can achieve their academic and personal goals. I last want to talk about scope of care. We provide services to students, and really the demand is high, and that's not unusual. We're glad that students know about it, and really nationally, counseling centers are utilized on college campuses, and we're really proud of that. So we really encourage that if your student has a relationship with a counselor or a psychologist, they might very well maintain that relationship, whether they do check-ins when they're home, or if a student is needing more intensive work than once a week. Because of the demand for our services, the norm is that we see students maybe every 10 days or every other week. The demand of services cannot really provide them weekly appointments. So if the student is requiring or kind of needing, if their issues warrant more intensive work, then we really encourage that student to get connected with either somebody at home or somebody here in the Farmville area. Generally, we can manage cases here, but the scope of care is that weekly counseling is just a luxury of the past. So I think I'll kind of end there, and I want to pass the microphone on to Dr. Kevin to talk about stress and anxiety.
Yes. Again, my name is Dr. David DeVito, and I'm one of the counselors here, senior staff at Counseling and Psychological Services, CAPS for short. And like everyone here, I do individual counseling, group counseling, crisis intervention, outreach, like this webinar, and also I also run the stress and anxiety management group, and that's probably the reason why I was kind of selected here to talk a little bit about stress. So one of the things I want to bring up about stress and anxiety is that kind of research shows this is the #1 issue or presenting issue that college students come into counseling centers across the country, and usually that's true year in, year out for a number of years. And so, kind of thinking about the increased utilization of our services, especially for issues related to stress and anxiety. Why is that? There's several different reasons. One is, I think the advent of psychotropic medications has allowed more students that a generation ago might not have been have been able to function on the level to be able to go to college and be able to maintain success. So have students that have some pre-existing anxiety disorders coming into college and they need our services from time. The other thing is also, I think there is there's still a stigmatization of using college counseling centers or just mental health services in general. But I do believe that, it comes to the way more anecdotal and a little bit more about knowing about the numbers that increase services across the country regarding college counseling centers is that I think more students are seeking their services. So I think on one level, there is maybe a destigmatization, and that's a good thing. They're coming more willingly to utilize our services. So that is another reason why there is an influx of students, especially students with stress and anxiety issues. Now, also, if you think about stress on a developmental level, it's a very unique time. Everyone has stress. Stress is you cannot live life without having some sort of stress throughout any phase of your life. And college is no different. And there are some unique things about developmentally that college students can go through that can lead to feeling stressed and anxious. So I want to kind of almost normalize a little bit of that stress. There is some. It's pretty normal to have some stress throughout the college for a number of reasons. And one is just that life transition from being an adolescent to becoming an autonomous individual. And so think about where they are in their life. So for one example is kind of the issue of homesickness, that transition. For many incoming first-year students, this is their first time that they have been away from home for long periods of time. So that is really a life learning experience. And that can create a lot of stress for a student. That's why, without fail, we see a lot of students in the first semester of their career at Longwood with issues with trying to separate from their parents and trying to adjust to having their own space away from home. But there's also other issues that are very unique to the challenges and stressors for college students. Another is the fact that it's their own interpersonal development. They're learning, forming new friendships. Back home, they might have had friends, family friends, or friends that they've known since kindergarten, first grade. So you might not have, for a long time, learned those skills to create new friends. And so they're thrust into a new environment where they're expected to, well, how do I navigate? How do I connect with others? And so we often see that as well. And also we see that in college counseling that I do with students is that, there's definitely academic stress, but a lot of times we focus on interpersonal stresses, including relational issues. So, so forming new friendships and also, learning kind of conflict resolution and arguments with their roommates. How do they deal with, those types of life issues on their own without maybe their parents, without you guys being there? So that's another kind of a developmental issue going on. And also career. Basically that question, what do I want to do with my life? Picking a major and where does that kind of lead? Am I picking the right major? Is this really what I want to do with my life? For the next 30 or 40 years. That's often, stress that students, that happens at this stage of their life. So that type of question. But also, those larger questions, of more universal existential questions, that happens when they transition from adolescent to adulthood. So, question their values, and hopefully, if they're in some really engaging classes and engaging learning environment, they start looking at more of those introspective questions. Who do I want to be? What and how do I create a very successful and happy life? And so those are great questions to ask, but they do cause some internal conflict, stress of what that is. And also, if you look at the transition from high school to college and how that can be stressful. High school is a very different world than when you compare to college. That there are more freedom here and less structure, and so they have more responsibility, and so they have to learn to manage that balance between having that newfound freedom and being responsible in order to get their work done here at college. So all those things, all those life transitions and all that development as they transition from adolescence in high school to college, and then hopefully the next step into adulthood after college. So there's a lot of unique developmental issues that causes internal stress, that stresses within one's life and a student's life, in your son and daughter's life. And so, I want to kind of also say that stress can be a good thing in the way that it can create your motivation to change circumstances. So I would kind of also want to focus on that stress is not, in and of itself, is not an inherently bad thing. That stress can be a good thing. It also can allow you that if you have a certain level of stress, it helps you actually to kind of heighten your awareness, give you energy, and increase shot of adrenaline that helps with concentration and memory, which helps with getting the energy to actually do your academic work or to doing a music recital, to be able to perform your instrument, to be able to play basketball or field hockey if you're on a sports team here. So there's a certain level of that stress is kind of needed. But then there's sometimes what happens is that stress can turn into a bad thing. So what does that mean? So usually what happens is when stress kind of turns bad, we kind of look at maybe the stress response, the duration. So instead of maybe dealing with one stressor and then the stress, like say, study for her exam and take the exam, the stress is over. Some people that have real problems with stress or anxiety, their stress response doesn't go down. It keeps on going and going. It becomes what we call kind of chronic stress. And so that causes a whole host of issues. Then we also look at kind of the attitude that you might have towards your stress. That also has a bearing on how you approach the stress experience. So, for example, if you see stress as a bad thing, as opposed to maybe a challenge, a stressor being a challenge, that it can lead you to feel very powerless and feeling very overwhelmed, instead of seeing it as something as good as you're learning on how to deal and cope with that stressor. And this has a lot of impacts, and one of the kind of major impacts is kind of physiological. It's not uncommon that that prolonged stress response creates impacts on your immune system. So often anxiety and dealing with chronic stress, they start having colds more often, headaches. There's now links to how it impacts cardiovascular system. Inflamming the cardiovascular system, and you increase problems with high cholesterol, high blood pressure issues. So there's a lot of physiological reactions that lead to kind of chronic stress issues. So I guess the one thing that we want to focus on is that maybe things that you guys can observe, like certain symptoms, that if you see your son or daughter are kind of struggling with, that you might look at maybe either redirecting them our way or to have a chat, just check in with them and give them support. And so there's a whole host of kind of warning signs and symptoms that you can see in your son or daughter that can be like, okay, now it's time to approach you and give you support, or to come our way and redirect them to CAPS. So, some of the things that might be happening, that you might be noticing certain changes from the way your son or daughter might act or behave normally, that might be indication of dealing with stress or maybe or an anxiety disorder, or things like irritability, a little bit more angry, the easier to anger, kind of nervousness or excessive worry. You notice them kind of perseverating on certain issues more often, and those kind of racing thoughts, and they tell you about them. They can't get these thoughts out of it. Procrastination is another one. Often people see procrastination as they like to attribute it to laziness. I don't hear that often, but really, that's really it's not entirely accurate. It's not really accurate. You have to look at the source of procrastination. And one of the sources of procrastination is stress and anxiety. That the stress of the work is so overbearing, so overwhelming, that they would rather think and do other things than to deal with that stressor. Okay, for example, a big chemistry exam. I'd rather be playing Call of Duty on my Xbox than having to deal with that. So they keep putting it off and off and off. And paradoxically, it ends up creating more anxiety because they put it off so long. So procrastination. So if you notice your child, your son or daughter, is not getting their schoolwork done, when they're opposed to passing work, that could be a sign of stress. Appetite changes, either eating too much or eating not at all. So stress eating, gives you comfort foods, high carb foods, chicken wings, sorts of things, can be a sign of stress eating. But also the opposite is true. That sometimes we get so stressed, we can feel that stress in our stomach, and that go beyond just butterflies, that ball of knot in the stomach. We have no appetite, and especially if it goes on long enough, that you can actually see weight loss. So being monitoring that, if you notice kind of appetite, is your son or daughter, are they sleeping okay? Sleep is often profoundly impacted by stress. Those racing thoughts at night can keep people up and not fall asleep for 1, 2, 3 hours at a time. And so they're noticing that there is state issues with your child can be an issue. We talked about the weakened immune system, getting colds more. I went opposed to in home or back in high school when that was less of an issue. Frequent headaches, another, stress has a very strong physiological basis in our body. We feel stress, and we all carry it in different ways. Some people, it's, headache, stress, and some people, feeling nauseous. Other people, it's muscle tension. Feel like they carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. So you feel it, here. So that's another sign of stress that you can observe. I also want to kind of bring up kind of panic attacks that sometimes happens. In this, you might observe, wondering what if your son or daughter is having a panic attack. There's some distinct markers for that. So, increased heart rate, so the heart is really pounding out of their chest or feels like it. So, really a lot of chest things, tightening of the chest, shallow breathing, feeling like they're suffocating. That often goes with the feeling of impending doom, that they're going to die. That's when we're talking about kind of intense anxiety, intense panic. Often there'll be some physiological markers like trembling and shaking or sweating, chills, kind of these heat sensations. Also, there's maybe some tingling or numbness that they might tell you that they're having these intense episodes of panic that might be going on. Feeling dizzy or lightheaded. So these are all kind of symptoms of like panic. So these are things to kind of look for when you're talking to your son about struggling, as a way to kind of gauge whether maybe they need some extra support, whether it be with you or friends. Social support is very important way to manage their stress. Get assistance. But we're also here as well. And like we said, we're very utilized with this being the number one issue that we see students. And that's one of the reasons why we created the Stress and Anxiety Management Group. I've been running that group for about 5 years now. And I really enjoy running this group. It's an amazing group. I'm not going to put this group as much as I can. But it's very powerful. And I think it's very powerful with this population. There's something immensely therapeutic when you're surrounded with other people, your peers that know what you're going through. To be able to say, yeah, Joe, I know what you're feeling because I go through that experience. And this is how I try to struggle. So this is how I do it. So they get the shared support, they get the constructive feedback, they listen and hear that when they share their struggles and their stories. And they have really good therapeutic outcomes. So I run that every year, and I have usually returnees coming back because they find this as a very valuable therapeutic to get up with that stress.
All right, so my name is Amanda McKinney, and I'm one of the psychologists here at CAPS. And I want to talk to you a little bit about depression as a clinical diagnosis, but also just kind of what we kind of decide to call depression, even though it doesn't necessarily meet the diagnostic criteria. So like we've all said, college is a very different time. It's really challenging for students. And a lot of times what happens is students get depressive symptoms when they're faced with those challenges. And so, they're on their own for the first time, learning to live independently for the first time, taking really hard classes, having roommate conflicts and other interpersonal conflicts, getting a lot of less sleep. And all of those things can be really overwhelming and help cause some depressive symptoms. We all face both large and small setbacks on a regular basis, but sometimes for college students it can kind of feel like a setback is the end of the world, and it can be something that really brings them down and makes it so it's really hard to function. And what I really want to focus on in my section of this webinar is that functioning piece is what is the most important. I'm sure that you've heard of high-functioning depression or people who have been depressed but still seem to have their stuff together. But sometimes even a little setback, especially when you're already a vulnerable college student, it can be something that really could use a little bit of help from us at CAPS, from family and friends, things like that. So in general terms, depression is basically a medical illness or a mental illness, and it has a lot of symptoms. I think most people associate depression with sadness, but that's not the only symptom, and sometimes people don't even feel sad, but they still qualify for depression. So I want to point that out, that it doesn't necessarily mean that your son or daughter is going to be in their dorm crying. That's not always a symptom that we need to see to diagnose with depression. So sometimes that depression, especially in the age range that college students are in, it can be seen more as irritability or not wanting to be around others, and that might be a trademark symptom for them. And a lot of times we see students who just completely lose interest in the things that used to interest them. So they used to work out a lot or be pretty active or be really social, and then suddenly they're withdrawing and they're staying at home watching TV more than they used to, and just not wanting to be around others or not really engaging in the same types of things that they used to, and that can be a really significant symptom for them. Basically what we're most concerned about is how that depression might interfere with their daily lives, with their functioning in college. Obviously, their primary reason here is to get up and go to class and do well. And in a lot of the students that we see who come in for depressive symptoms, that's one of the first things to go. They're not going to their classes anymore. They're staying in their dorm rooms. They're not being engaged like we would like them to be in college. And that can obviously cause them more stress and setbacks when they're not doing very well in their classes or when they're losing friends because they're not being as social or anything like that. So in terms of actual diagnoses, I kind of want to talk a little bit about some of the diagnoses that we might make if a student does meet those clinical diagnoses, but also, like I said, we can have kind of a low-grade depression or depressive symptoms that don't necessarily meet criteria, but are still something that are interfering with the student's functioning and is a good thing to get treated for. So I'm sure most people have heard of major depressive disorder, and that's kind of the big one. And that's when we're seeing a very discrete episode that's really different from somebody's normal functioning or their typical personality. And I'll talk a little bit more about additional symptoms that you might look out for in your student. There's also kind of more of a low-grade depression that's called, now it's called persistent depressive disorder, and that's that chronic low-grade depression. It typically lasts for 6 or more months. And so that's something that you might end up in your students or in yourself, where it just seems like you're always a little bit low, maybe not to the depressive or to a depressive state where it's really severe, but it's definitely problematic, and students aren't functioning nearly as well as we'd like them to be. And then we also see something called seasonal affective disorder, and that's something that tends to happen when, it's the colder winter months, it gets darker earlier in the day, and some people have a tendency to get a little bit more depressed during the winter months than in the spring or summer months, just because of all of those seasonal changes, and that can kind of cause people to get in a little bit of a rut. So in terms of the symptoms of depression, I want you to know what they are so you know what to look out for, because like I said, it's not necessarily that they're going to be sitting in their dorm rooms crying or saying that they're depressed, but they might have a lot of the markers that are kind of concerning. And so if somebody is experiencing a persistent sad or really anxious or kind of an empty mood, they kind of feel blah. I think a lot of my students refer to it as I just feel blah, I'm just here. And they don't really have any highs or anything like that. They just kind of feel icky. That's kind of one of the symptoms that we look for. Sometimes we see people who feel absolutely hopeless and just kind of pessimistic about the future or about what their options are, and that can definitely be a concerning symptom. We also see feelings of guilt or worthlessness or helplessness, like I don't know I can't do anything about this. This is just going to be me forever, and I don't know how to handle this. Like I said before, a big one, especially in the college-age population, is a loss of interest or pleasure in hobbies or activities that they used to enjoy. So when you see that kind of change, that could be a potential marker for you to look out for. We also see a lot of people who come in with decreased energy. They're kind of slowing down. They're really fatigued. They get tired really easily. Just being up and out for a couple hours is just so exhausting for them, and that's definitely a sign of depression. We also see a little bit of difficulty with concentration, decision making, remembering things, stuff like that. Another big one is sleep, and in college, people tend to have trouble sleeping anyway, whether it's because they're stressed and anxious or whether it's because it's a brand new environment. But when people have trouble falling asleep or they have trouble staying asleep or waking up constantly in the middle of the night, especially early morning awakening can be a pretty significant marker for what we look for if we want to diagnose somebody with depression. Another one, and a lot of these symptoms, as you might notice, overlap with symptoms of anxiety and stress, which can be kind of confusing, especially from a parental standpoint. But another one is the appetite changes or massive changes in weight. So whether a student gains a lot of weight in a short period of time or loses weight in a short period of time, that can definitely be a symptom that we're looking out for. General restlessness and irritability is another common symptom. And then we also see persistent physical symptoms with depression. So sometimes people will come in and they have regular muscle pain or headaches or things like that. And that can be a sign that there's something else going on that's maybe stressing them out, or they're just not feeling themselves. They're feeling down and depressed. And then maybe the most serious symptom that I think a lot of people are worried to talk about is suicidality. So typically when people feel depressed, they might have a higher likelihood of either thinking about death in a general sense, or thinking about maybe they want to kill themselves, or maybe they're thinking about what it would be like to die. And that can be really alarming as a parent to hear that your son or daughter has been thinking, maybe I'm not going to wake up tomorrow morning, or things like that, or if it becomes more active. So especially if you hear or suspect that there's any suicidal thoughts or significant thoughts about death, that would definitely be a case where we would hope that you would refer your son or daughter to come see us or a professional at home, because obviously that can be alarming, and it would be good to have them go through a risk assessment with a professional. But it's also really important for all of the symptoms that, if you're noticing them, that you just are supportive of them yourself as well. I think that a lot of students are afraid that their parents are going to think that they're weak or that they're not good at being a student if they feel depressed or if they're having trouble adjusting to college. And so just knowing the symptoms and knowing that there's a change in your son or daughter's activity and personality and their overall functioning can be really good for you to just have that conversation with them and say, I've noticed that things have changed for you a little bit, and I think that it would be beneficial for you to talk to somebody about it. The people who come to our office don't necessarily have to have a psychological clinical diagnosis. It can be just a little bit of adjustment problems, or it can be problems with roommates. It can be really anything. It can be they just want to process significant events in their life, or it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be depressed or suicidal or have anxiety or anything like that. And so letting them know that it's not going to be something where we think that they're crazy, or you're going to think that they're crazy because they're coming to talk to us. And then just so you're aware what the treatment kind of looks like for that, for the most part, the treatment of choice for depressive symptoms is going to be talk therapy. It's going to be coming in for individual counseling or group counseling. And like Maureen said earlier, that looks like typically every other week is when we see our individual clients, and then our group sessions meet weekly. And so a lot of depressive students have been in my group, which is the Understanding Yourself and Others group. And so we have different treatment options for them, whether it's individual or group. And then sometimes we also ask them, or maybe they're just interested on their own, in medication. And so we can get them hooked up with Dr. Judd or another provider who can talk to them about options. And just, again, talking about options doesn't necessarily mean they're committing to go on medication for the rest of their lives or anything like that. I just think it's really important to look at all of those options and know what treatments are out there, because it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is lifelong. As a parent, something else that you can do to help your son or daughter would be to let them know just some very basic things they can do to take care of themselves, and very small changes that they can make to help themselves either before they come to therapy or while they're in therapy with us. And so getting daily exercise is a really good treatment addition. Having regular exercise can help clear the mind. It can help get your mind off of things. And it also obviously is going to affect endorphins and your brain chemistry in general. And so getting that daily exercise can help regulate mood, as well as getting outside in the sun, which again is why the seasonal affective stuff can play a role, because we don't have as much opportunity to get out in the sun in the summertime. But being out in the sun and in the warmth and in nature can be really therapeutic for people. Making sure that there's a balanced diet. So when they're going to the dining hall, not just eating pizza and fries, although they're very delicious, making sure they're getting some vegetables on their plate as well, because that's going to help with regulating their mood. And then consistent sleep habits is maybe one of the most important things I can suggest to students. A lot of times college is going to throw off their sleep schedule if they can have one before college, and making sure that they are trying to have a consistent bedtime and wake time and sticking to that, because any disturbance in sleep can make a very, very negative impact on mood if it keeps going on and if students are getting really sleep deprived and really stressed out over that. And then, of course, we also encourage students to spend quality time with family members who are supportive of them, friends who are supportive of them, people that they can rely on and feel comfortable with, because that can definitely help be a mood booster and also give them an opportunity to talk about things or to vent or just kind of get themselves heard a little bit. And then the last suggestion I've got for you is to suggest to your son or daughter to try new things, to try fun things, to go out and do the things that they used to enjoy. Even if they're not enjoying it right now, it can be really helpful for them to just get back into that routine and to get out and be social with their friends and kind of stick with who they are rather than getting stuck in that rut of never leaving their dorm or avoiding all of their friends and family.
Cool. So I'm Dr. Glass, and I'm going to be the last person to talk with you guys, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about the types of trauma that we typically see that come into CAPS, symptoms of trauma, and then I'm going to talk about my services specifically to the new addition to Longwood University. So typically, some of the most common issues that we see regarding trauma in CAPS, sexual assault that occurs while in college. We often see a lot of sexual assault that occurs, especially in high school, middle school. That's also a pretty common one. Childhood sexual abuse also creeps in there too. And also more generalized trauma. It doesn't necessarily have to be sexual in nature, but things like coming from a really unstable home environment, just really significant, chaotic previous experiences before coming to college. It can also be things like witnessing a horrific accident, witnessing a death or a murder, learning about a friend's murder or somebody that was close to the individual. So trauma, so kinds of trauma that we work with aren't necessarily sexual. It can be a lot of different types of trauma. And I should mention too that all four of us work with trauma. It's not specific to me that all four of us have skills and are able to work with students who have experienced trauma, and even the interns as well. My role comes into play more with the reporting options, which I'll get to here in a second. So rates of trauma, a common statistic that you'll hear a lot is that 20% of college women experience sexual assault at some point in their college career, and that's a pretty staggering number. And so we do get a fair amount of students who are coming in who are sexual assaulted while they're here on campus. 9 times out of 10, the individual knows the person who assaulted them. There tends to be this myth that it's a stranger rape or that somebody's jumping out of the bushes to attack somebody. That's pretty uncommon, actually. Most of the time, the individual, they know the person who ends up assaulting them. At Longwood, at CAPS, out of the 10% of students that we see out of the entire student population, 5% of those students who come to CAPS report coming to CAPS specifically for issues with sexual assault. We have lots of students that we work with who may have had sexual assault previously but aren't coming to CAPS to work on that issue at the moment. It's just about 5% who are coming to seek services to say, I was sexually assaulted recently and I'm struggling with it and I need somebody to talk to, which is a pretty small number. The other types of trauma, I would say a little bit less. I don't have any hard numbers for you guys there, but probably about 2 to 3% of the students that we see are reporting other types of trauma. So some symptoms of trauma that you might notice in your student has sometimes it can be kind of hard for students to talk to their parents about these kinds of events when they happen. Students might feel ashamed or embarrassed. A lot of times students blame themselves, and it's not their fault. So that's one of our jobs, is to help the student understand that it wasn't their fault, that something would happen to them that shouldn't have happened. But some changes that you can look for are, again, some of the similar symptoms to stress and anxiety and depression, irritability. A student who maybe once was pretty pleasant might suddenly be very on edge all the time, kind of snapping at people around them. really concerned about their safety. That's a big one that I see with trauma. A student who typically before trusted most people now all of a sudden feels kind of unsafe around others. They may not run errands after dark. They may not go socialize with their friends after hours on campus, especially if it's in a place that isn't very well lit. They may feel really scared to be at home alone, and they may kind of go out of their way to make sure that they're not home alone. Other things that we can see too are students feeling detached from other people, feeling like they don't experience positive emotions anymore, that it's kind of impossible to feel okay, it's impossible to feel happy, it's impossible to feel normal. Feeling like other people may not understand them, that other people are worried about how they're going to finish their homework, and I'm having flashbacks about a rape that occurred 3 weeks ago. How could they possibly understand what I'm going through? Students feeling really down, anxious, depressed after an assault. Panic attacks are pretty frequent and pretty common as a result of memories of the trauma, thinking about the trauma, being faced with reminders of the trauma. Another thing that you might notice too is avoidance. If somebody around the student is talking about just trauma in general or sexual assault, sometimes they can shut them down or initiate a panic attack. So how I mentioned earlier, my role is a little bit different as the campus advocate in that I can assist students in filing limited reports. So if a student is sexually assaulted, and it doesn't just cover sexual assault, there's a lot of different situations that are covered for services. So students who experience sexual discrimination, harassment, sexual misconduct, sexual assault, dating and relationship violence, and stalking, as well as retaliation against anything, those are those are times when all of us can provide services and I can assist in additional reporting options. A common question that I get is, does the assault have to occur on campus? And the answer to that is no. A lot of times it does because a lot of students here at Longwood do live on campus. But we're still able to provide services for students if they're assaulted at another college in the state, if they're assaulted outside of the state, if they're assaulted at home, not at another college, if they're assaulted at a bar at home. It doesn't matter at all. We can still provide services. We've had cases where a student was away on a trip in a different state and was sexually assaulted down there, and some of our staff on campus were able to assist the student in getting in touch with the police office down there. So we're really willing to help students who have been assaulted in any location. Now my services, what I do, well, all four of us provide confidential counseling, and how I differentiate from them is that I also provide advocacy services on behalf of the student. So if a student has questions specifically about Title IX stuff, specifically about limited reporting options, if they're going through that process and they want support just for that, I can assist them. I can also assist the student in obtaining reasonable and appropriate resources on campus. So let's say that a student has class with somebody who sexually assaulted them over the weekend, and going to class obviously is a trigger because they're sitting right next to this person. The student can get in touch with me, and I can get in touch with the instructor or the registrar's office with very limited information that those offices don't have to know, and I just say, hey, I'm the campus advocate, this student needs to be moved, and they can assist with that. A thing that's important to keep in mind here, though, is that these are reasonable and appropriate resources. So moving a student out of a class with a respondent is, of course, reasonable and appropriate. Sometimes there have been other requests beyond what we can provide, but again, our goal is really to work with the student and assist them in getting the appropriate resources that they need. Another part of the limited report that I can assist students in filing, if a student comes to CAPS, we are a confidential reporting option. A student can tell any four of us or any of the interns the sexual assault that they've experienced, and the information stays with us. It does not go anywhere else. The only other option for them on campus is student health. They are also confidential reporters. So a student can share with the nurse practitioner that they're meeting with that they were sexually assaulted, and again, that information stays with them. With other offices on campus, they are required by law to report, and if they are considered a reasonable employee and a student shares with them that they've been sexually assaulted, that employee, that faculty member, that staff member then has to initiate a full Title IX investigation. If a student comes to me, fill out a limited report. Now, what that does, though, is that it prevents the student from pursuing disciplinary action against the individual. So if the student is sexually assaulted and they want to pursue disciplinary action against the other student, they must do a full Title IX investigation. There's no other option. But if they're not really interested in doing the disciplinary action, if they just want it to be known, then they can come to me and then that's fine if this is a limited report. What the limited report gathers is very general information about the incident. It's mostly for tracking statistical purposes, so we can keep track of patterns and things that are happening on campus. But the student would inform me the nature, the date, the time, the general location of the incident. And again, it's just a really general picture of what happened. There was no nitty-gritty details specific about what went on. There are a couple of caveats, though, with this, is that if the situation is significant enough, if it's a really heinous situation, or if it's a situation that has been flagged by campus law enforcement or the Title IX office, a timely warning may be issued out to the campus community, but again, the timely warning has very general information, the day, the time, the place, and the general gist of what happened. Normally, they just say a sexual assault occurred. Limited reports, like I mentioned, also limit students from pursuing disciplinary action against that student, but I'm still available for support even if they decide not to. And the other important caveat for this is if a student initially decides to go through with a limited report, but they change their mind and they decide to do a full report at any point, they're more than welcome to do that. It's no issue whatsoever, and we're happy to assist them through that process.
Great. We don't have any challenge. Okay. Great. Right, absolutely. So we're really proud of our team, and we're really here to work with your students. If you would like more information, you can certainly visit our website, or feel free to email myself, and I'm happy to talk with you further. Thank you.